My name is Glenn Garvin. I'm lead pastor. I tell our church locally that I am their chief servant officer. So they've gotten used to that. And we're doing something a little different this morning. David and I are having a chat. This is Robin and I's oldest son right here.
Hi.
And yeah. And man, what a joy it is. And what is going on is David had a journey that started several years ago, and he's going to catch up on all that. But I really thought it was important to hear his story because I am blown away at the extraordinary details, what I've been saying, the extraordinary detail of what God does and did to reach people. And I hope that it not only really just sinks into what David's going to share with us, but I really hope it sinks in both for parents and family members that are literally praying for their friends and adult children. And so this morning we're going to hop in and get going on it pretty quick. And so I just want to introduce David Garvin this morning to you. Woo!
Hi guys.
Yeah, and we chose a different format because, and he'll fill you in too, but we had several chats amongst all the times over the past few years, yeah. And we had an open conversations constantly. Mm-hmm. David and I and the whole family, we never stopped talking. David told us exactly what was going on every moment. Robin and I, he was listening, so we had these conversations going back and forth really several times, and I just so appreciate the openness and the fact that we stayed very much connected. And so we thought, we need to have a table up here and just share the story just like that. So,
which I appreciate. I don't know if I'd be able to just stand and deliver. It's not really my style. Yeah. But thank you for this. It feels so much more natural to. And I've already shared my story a bunch with individuals, so I wanted it to feel like just going out to coffee or lunch with my dad and all of you here with us. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Let's jump in.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, cool.
Feels like a podcast right now.
I know, it really does.
Which is really interesting. I didn't even think that, but it feels like a podcast. Okay.
That's a big part of the story.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll start there. I'll start with the podcast. I'll kind of do a little teaser of what happened, and then I'll go reverse from there. So it was October 11th last year. Kind of out of nowhere, my dad sent me and my wife, Allie, a text. And we reviewed this after the fact to kind of make sure the timeline was straight. And there's so many details, and like he said, it's like God's orchestration was in it the whole time, even down to the minutes and the timing of everything. But it was October 11th in the morning. It was a Saturday, and just so you guys know too, I will say, especially if he looks at me a certain way, I will cry. It'll be shaky voice. It's going to happen the whole time. I'm okay with it. I'm an emotional guy, so I know that's going to happen. So just bear with me.
And if he starts crying,
yeah, it's going to be over. And then I'll see my mom. Then I'll see other people. It's going to happen.
I don't have a chance.
Yeah. So. So he sends me this text message, kind of out of nowhere, and it's a link to a podcast, and it says something like, "Hey, have you been engaging with any of these things?" And I could see a little preview of the podcast in the text message, and I responded within a few hours. But it's so funny how the details of everything work, where, and for you techie people, you can understand this, but in the text message, it was an Apple podcast link, and that title and image, there was no image besides the logo of this specific podcast, was different than when I looked it up the next day on YouTube, is where I listen to and watch all of my podcasts, and I like that experience more. Very two different things, and very two different thumbnails and images and title of this specific podcast, which I think if on that Saturday, if I really would have known the full breadth of this podcast episode, I probably would have not listened to it. But I responded to my dad on that Saturday. Sunday happens. I kind of set myself up to, and this is part of the story which I'll go through, but at this point in my life, it was 2025, I had got really good at I'm a curious guy, and part of why I walked away from the faith, which I will explain and talk through, was because to follow these certain curiosities and to answer some of these questions that I had. And one of those things was this concept and idea of around growth mindset. I even learned about growth mindset at work. I think it's kind of a tactic to help people stay working and be focused on work and not leaving corporations, but it still taught me a lot of really good things in terms of basically, if something makes you uncomfortable, change is always going to happen. And as a Christian, even as walking away from my faith, which even this concept I was learning about in 2018, 2019, but the whole idea was I was not good with change. I was not good with being uncomfortable. I liked being comfortable. I liked having things set a certain way. I liked things organized. And so I was at this job as a designer, and I'm working along, and it's a name change for the company. It's a CEO moving on. It's a new mission statement, and that stuff started to happen or so many times at work that it just threw me every time, and I would poke my head up out of the sand and be like, should I look for a new job? I felt really thrown off in my life whenever a lot of change happened. But this concept of growth mindset is really just like, if you know change is going to happen, hit it head on. Ride the wave of change rather than let it crash into you every single time. And so it took a lot of change to help me get used to that. But 5-6 years later, at this time, fast forward back to October, when I see the title, I see it on Apple Podcasts, I'm like, cool, send them a nice text message back. Yeah, I haven't tried any of these things, specifically plant medicine, which we'll talk about, or I forget what else. The title mentioned fallen angels specifically, which I will also talk about. But, okay, long story short, on Sunday, I opened up the link on YouTube, and you guys should listen to this podcast after the fact. But the thumbnail, the title was like, whoa, hit me in the face of like plant medicine, ayahuasca, opening your third eye, things I wouldn't call New Age at the time, but it is, and the fallen angels. And so I was so uncomfortable, and I could see this picture of these two guys on one side of the thumbnail, this lady, Krista, older lady compared to me, on the other side of this picture, and I was like, oh, I know what's going on here. My dad's trying to get me back to go to church, to hear from God, to convert, Yeah. And I felt all of that on Sunday.
You used a phrase that I really loved. You said cheesy clickbait. Is that?
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh my goodness. Yeah. Because that's not beyond me to send a cheesy clickbait.
Yeah.
Just some weird thing. Because we just do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. So, but all that to say, the groundwork had already been laid, and I think God used this, where I knew it was going to be very uncomfortable to listen to this podcast. And it was going to make me face some certain beliefs or things. So I had done that process so many times of push into things that made me uncomfortable by this point that I was excited. You could flip the switch in your head to be like, no, it's exciting. I get to choose to grow in this moment. If something stretches you or there's change facing you, you could hit that head on. And so I was like, okay, there's some growth coming through. I don't know what this means. I'm okay with being uncomfortable. Let me jump in. So I started that podcast. By the end of it, I was back with Jesus, which I will talk about. Okay, but now we'll go back. Let me take a break.
90 minutes.
90-minute episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in. Okay, we'll get back to that. So I grew up in this church, not just in church. I grew up in this church. We lived across the street. I'm a double pastor's kid. Hi, Mom. I started playing piano for kids' church in service of worship when I was 5 or 6. Did not stop playing music for church really until COVID, until the end of 2020 when we had our daughter in September of that year. I was going to hit a bunch of things. So
Played everything.
Played everything. I ended up playing drums. I learned guitar. Started playing drums over in this corner for a big church, when I was 13.
When he was so young that people thought the drums were playing themselves because they couldn't see him. And they're like,
just
who's
sticks,
on the drums?
Sticks flying around.
It's David.
Yeah. I ended up meeting some friends that went to this church. We had a worship band, and we toured a little bit in California and played at summer camps and winter camps, and that was amazing. That was a big part of my life, too. I'm just going fast through some of this history so you guys know, but ended up I did some city college around here at Cerritos, and then had this whole plan to go to Cal State Long Beach, and God had other plans at that time where I already had classes picked out and all this stuff. It was a big story. But long story short, Cal State Long Beach changed their application standards that year. I was then short one foreign language class. So then I did what I told myself I would never do, which is go to the same college that my parents did. Yeah. It was called Southern California Bible College at the time. Wait, is that there?
Sure. Yeah, SCC. Yeah.
SCC, Southern California Christian College, something like that. Then Vanguard, and I applied, and because if you got the money and if you write a letter, basically, they'll accept anyone, so I needed that at that point, yeah. Also, they're alumni, so that helped too. But I was literally a month before school started, and I got in and went to Vanguard. I transferred in. I did a year as a music major, trying that kind of the study of music rather than art and design for the first time in my life. I kind of flipped those two subjects. Ended up meeting my wife at Vanguard in the elevator in a dorm room.
It's a great story.
Yeah, it's a good story. We get married in 2010. We end up, a few months before we get married, end up deciding to serve for this nonprofit, 2 different nonprofits in Uganda. So that was our first year of marriage. It was missions in a way. It was more of just working in service. It was a Christian organization, but it was teaching women how to crochet or make paper jewelry and helping them have jobs and provide for the family. So that was a whole chunk of our life too. But all that to say, I was a believer through and through the whole time. We get back from Uganda. We start our life here again as a married couple. And I'm just trucking along. Other things that happened, I ended up being involved in leadership in the church. We went to this church for a while called Garvin out of Long Beach. They're still a great church. I was a leader in the worship team and still playing drums and a little bit of bass at that time. And we ended up being house church pastors, basically some evolved form or different form of a small group, but this model was you send out your house church every year, so you multiply. And so that was really hard, but really good for me and my wife to be small group house church pastors, have a group of 20 people in our house meet for a year, and then split the group in half.
So the church was in Long Beach, and they lived in Costa Mesa. They still live in Costa Mesa. So that there's a pretty good drive there. But yeah, they were
we didn't have our daughter yet, so we could do that. And we love Long Beach too, because I grew up here. So all that to say, I was in deep for Jesus. I was in leadership. I was committed. We were serving. So then COVID happens, and started in essentially March of 2020. And the contrast is so crazy because the weekend before the first quarantine, the first shutdown, I believe it was late February, I was serving at a Holy Spirit conference at my church called Empowered. And it was a 3-day conference. I was involved with the worship side of things. But the contrast to go from the height of living, serving, operating in the Spirit to then... And I'll explain how I kind of slowly walked away and explored things. But that was the last time I was physically in church for almost 6 years. Which is part of the story. So then COVID happens, and I'm still playing worship, but it's essentially what happens is everything starts I don't mind the word deconstructing. I'm okay with it. For me, it felt like what was happening was compartmentalization. For me to analyze one chunk of my life at a time. And I think that was just kind of how life was happening. I don't think it was necessarily good or bad. It was just how life looked at that time, where all of a sudden you're not going to church in person anymore. But then you're trying to figure out, do I watch the live stream? Do I like that? Does that feel the same? But it starts to separate this idea of going to church and having a community, being in person, from watching a message in worship service on a screen, which I do not like. So that was hard for me.
Wasn't it a little disingenuous too, because you were still a part of the worship team,
Yeah.
and you were doing worship sets basically with no one. I mean, just the team.
Yeah.
I don't know who was there,
Yeah.
filming the video, but actually there was a lot of times that worship teams did this during COVID, and that became kind of that's an odd thing.
Yeah.
Like it's a more performa than it is being with the body, with the family.
I still liked it, but it was definitely like behind the scenes, there was that separation and that kind of segmenting happening. But I think what it did first, it was separate the sermon and a message from the experience of worship, which I think both are important. But I went on still enjoying the recording process and meeting every 2 weeks and recording 2 services worth of worship songs. And we still had our own worship experience with the worship band and team in that moment on Saturdays, and I enjoyed it. But what it was doing was, I also don't like then watching myself play worship a second time on a live stream as a recording version. And so then I stopped watching worship. And so that separated my version of worship with the team, which we were still very much worshiping and in the presence of God there together. But then the Sunday version of that, I would just watch the message. And then at some point, stuff's happening in our country. There's Black Lives Matter, there's protests, there's things being talked about that are uncomfortable. And I didn't disagree with what my pastor at the time was saying, but I think it was just open doors for the enemy to start working and saying, that's a little too much to take the time and listen to that sermon. It's just going to be easier to not, just keep playing worship on Saturdays every 2 weeks, and that's your thing, So I stopped watching messages. Again, I'll speed up here, but what ended up happening is one of the first questions I remember being able to, I was even okay with asking myself this question if it was only for me, which I don't think so. But one of the first questions I began asking myself was, do I really enjoy the process of playing and serving in worship, or do I just like hanging out with these people and playing music together? And it started to de-escalate the presence and importance of God and Jesus in that process of worship. And I think a lot of people, there's lots of different ways to walk away from the faith and from God. A lot of people, and in my generation and younger, have some form of church hurt or thing that they didn't like how something went down in a church, and I understand all of that. That wasn't my story. That's not how it started with me. I think it was a form of pride and it coming in and questioning and having me question, I might just like hanging out with friends and playing drums, I've never thought about it like that, and that question kind of started to take root. So by the time we have our daughter in September of that year, when she was born on the 6th, it was amazing. She was in the NICU for a few days, so it was a little touch and go, but we brought her home. She was perfectly healthy by then. And then I took off. I was working remote out of our living room at that time at a desk, because that's what, if you had a remote job, you're just figuring it out as you go. Every month is different. Every week is different with your job. And I was still working more than full time at that time. But when we had Millie, I got to take a break. And so I took a break from playing drums, which I was still doing. Got to take a 6-week break from work, which is a long time for me. I had taken vacations before and time off, but again, to compress that story, after 6 weeks of a full break, I wasn't watching the sermons. Then I stopped playing drums during that time to just be with my family. I went back and I tried to play drums one more time, and I didn't believe it anymore. And I think this is a good thing. about myself, but I could not play drums in that setting, even in a recording setting with my friends, and live a lie. I could not play out worship music and songs and not believe what I was playing and serving in that way. So I talked to my worship pastor, Faith, at the time and said, you know what, I need to take a longer break from playing drums for the first time in my life. The 6 weeks at that point was the longest time I'd ever not played in some capacity, but after that, I completely backed out of that. So by the time 2021 hits in January, and I'll start going faster through this part, but I had no church at that point, and no service, and no true connection to a community or believers or of God personally for myself. Kind of was piecemealed, separated from my life, kind of one chunk at a time. So in 2021, I remember I don't really like New Year's resolutions, but I set goals. So my goals in that year were to be healthy and to work on myself and to, work on my health. And I picture myself being able to lift my daughter as long as I can. I want to be able to lift her up in the air and throw her, so that was my goal. So, which I don't think any of that is bad. And I'll just say this now, I do think Satan and the enemy and forces that are working against us and Jesus and the kingdom of God, one, they can't create anything. So just remember that. They can only manipulate and distort, but they can't create. That's just God. And two, they're opportunistic. They will wait for the perfect time. And
You're talking literally like spirits of darkness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which we'll get into.
Yeah. Wow. So these are real things.
They're real things. More to come on that. Because I didn't know that, or I think I knew that conceptually, but didn't feel it. But it got more and more real. So 2021, my metaphor for that year was the oxygen mask. You know, the whole thing where in a plane, if an emergency happens, you're supposed to take your oxygen mask and put it on yourself first before you help your family. I still think that's a valid, good metaphor. And I don't think the idea of taking care of yourself and your health is a bad thing, but it was an opportunity. And so all of 2021, I'm resetting my habits, working on my health, working out. I want to be able to lift my daughter and throw her in the air as long as I can. 2022, somewhere in there, again, I'm big in the beginning of year kind of feeling. I start researching UFOs and aliens. And the way I like to learn is why I'm big on podcasts, specifically on YouTube, because I like to hear from people directly. Because you're really just faced with the information yourself, and you're like, I either believe that person or I don't. Or I could feel in my gut and heart that like they're saying something true, or at least true to them, or not. But it's not translated through someone else, and I just really love the style of interview and sitting down with someone and hearing their story, because it just lets me decide if I believe it or not. So I got really into researching UFO stories, and if sightings were real, if crash landings were real, if all of that, Area 51, the whole thing. With that whole subject comes some conspiracy theories, comes some other information, but I was really just focused on people's stories. But again, it was another opportunity. And, I think around this time, I probably had one of my first lunches with my dad. We would usually go to Wahoo's. There was some with my mom there too. But as I felt stuff, as I learned stuff, like he said, I was pretty open about saying it, even if I was in the middle of still figuring it out and still processing it. But researching UFOs, if there's things driving or flying those UFOs, what's happening there? Do I believe that is a thing or not? That leads to, well, I didn't learn about that in the Bible. I don't know how that's understood or talked about. Started to paint this picture of what I said at the time, and I'll do a little bit of this ping pong back and forth. It's not who I am now, but that's okay. I can still talk about it. But I started out this picture in my head and heart of God feeling small.
You remember telling us that?
Yeah.
He's too small.
Yeah.
He's not enough. I don't know if you said that, but it's definitely...
Yeah, maybe not enough, but in some senses you could say that.
Small. Okay.
Small, yeah. But
and he's explaining to me, and then eventually to Robin, he's very serious about this, and he's dropping UFOs and aliens into our conversation, and this is hard for us. It's like we're trying. It's like, are you serious? Because, and we could read him. I could read him, and he's like, oh, he's serious. And I was trying to literally be respectful. You could tell. I mean, I can't hide anything from you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be respectful, but I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And then, how am I supposed to explain this to our family? And I was like, this is really. There was a point too. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up. But this is just real. But
go for it.
As at one point you brought up a little bit of your upbringing, and you said to me, you and Mom, you didn't teach me how to care for myself. You only taught us how to serve others. You remember that?
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
Well, yeah, that nails it. But
where's the problem there?
But now I'm like, now I feel bad. Like, oh, okay. So there was a lot of, we're grappling, but I'm telling you, the openness was what kept these conversations going.
Yeah.
And it, I don't know if I got it from you or you got it from me, but curiosity drives us.
Yeah.
And so I was just as much curious to find out what is going on as I was, and I'd leave it to his mother to try to convince him out of it, because I'm trying to find out what is going on, what happened, and I'm after, and he's telling me every bit of it.
Yeah.
You're not holding anything back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's good. Okay, so I'll just keep in some points in this middle part so we can get to the good stuff. Researching aliens and UFOs leads to other theories of the creation of our world and where people came from. And if that starts to be questioned, and there's other theories of that, there's this whole world of ancient aliens and theories, in that realm. There is stories of creation from other cultures and traditions. And so all of that I was exploring and learning about. And again, that's where this picture started to be painted of God feeling small, mostly because of the God I knew through my version of the Old Testament reading at that time, or on my memory at that time, which was already being, affected, or I was forgetting things, And it was less about the character of God and who he was and who he said he was, but more of what I remembered from the stories of the Old Testament specifically. And a lot of people still talk about this, and it's hard, is God genocidal? Is he bipolar? Is he one way in the Old Testament and then a different in the New Testament? I don't think so. But I did at the time. And because when you hear other theories of how all of this stuff and where we are might have come to be, it asks you and forces you to question stuff and question what you heard and what you believe for yourself. And so, okay, that's one whole track. I really view it now kind of as these threads. And it's one thread at a time, and I'm just following this thread and kind of pulling it, see where it goes, So there's this track and thread of UFOs, history of our Earth, where we come from. There's a whole other course that with working on my health and self-help, which I, again, think is okay to a point. It could cross this zone of balance and being neutral and get to other territory. But I got big into meditation and breath work, which I don't think is all bad. But I do think it opens doors and creates opportunities. So I was doing upwards of 30 to 45 minutes of meditation a day, some off of YouTube videos, some just off of silence and music. But I'm wanting to connect with something. I'm wanting to feel something talk back to me. And I didn't know that there are beings and entities that are more than willing to talk back to you.
Once there's an opening.
Once there's an opening. Yeah.
Take advantage of it.
Yeah. And we're not even yet I think I already had made some agreements that I didn't know about, which I'll talk about more. But even without agreements or this idea of contracts being signed, just the opening and the open door is enough for conversations to be happening. And I think, and the whole theme of this kingdom of God, kingdom of darkness thing, if I was to summarize it, the kingdom of darkness and the way the enemy works is a complete counterfeit. It's an inverse. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It does. It's just from a opposite side of things. And so if I'm sensitive and gifted and emotional and prophetic on this kingdom, that doesn't mean I'm not that in this kingdom. And so I could still sense and hear things. And the enemy used that as an opportunity. So I'm meditating a lot. I'm doing breath work. Okay, that leads to personal coaching. I got my first personal coach sometime around 2023, 2024. There's different versions of that. I found this guy on Instagram. I also had tried this book publishing course. But in this idea, if you follow the thread of self-help and self-improvement, and you start to basically hear this language of, and then I'll just cut right to the chase. In some form, I think this is just witchcraft, which we could talk about, but it's watered down or disguised as extreme self-help. And if you are manifesting your dream life, using the law of affirmation, using universal laws of the universe and of creation to create things for yourself, there is no creating things for yourself. So it's either coming from God in the protected path of Jesus Christ, or it's not. But I knew the difference. I knew what Jesus offered, and I knew that. I didn't know that the other side had also things to offer. And so this personal coach and some of the other courses, to speed through this part, like, man, they hammer you on reshaping your identity about what you want and making it happen and promising your dreams and wealth mindset and abundance and thinking about it all the time and reestablishing your identity on your new identity statement that you're writing. And what's happening is you're reprogramming yourself. And it's you don't realize until, well, you're just kind of, you're deceived. I was deceived. I was under the guise of like, well, I want the best for my family. I want the best for myself. If I'm the most healthy version of myself, best version of myself, living my dream life, like everything's going to be better. But that's where more of those opportunities started to happen. So I'm doing what's called affirmations morning, day, and night. I'm affirming who I want to be, this better future version. The whole thing is you're supposed to envision and feel in your body what you want from the future and pull it into the now. That's divination. That's sorcery. That's witchcraft, even if you don't feel it and know it in the moment. And so,
wow.
Yeah, I was doing that. I started calling... I came back to using the words God, but I felt more comfortable. I think I said this in multiple lunches as well. I felt more comfortable using the word source or universe. I didn't want to talk about Jesus as much, or he was kind of leveled with other gurus, teachers, ascended masters in this world that you call them, other people that reached this certain level of consciousness and frequency and closeness to God, like Buddha, like Krishna, like all these other ascended masters. But what happens is Jesus is de-elevated and everything else is elevated, and they feel like it's all on the same level. And then in some way, you yourself are elevated too, to believe, oh, Jesus didn't mean that when he said he was the only way and that his way was the only way to God. He meant if you live like him, you will be like Christ yourself, and you will be your own Christ. And it's this whole other theology and way of thinking about some of the words, not all the words that Jesus said. And so I'm rolling through this stuff. We're into 2024, 2025 at this point. And momentum has picked up, and these threads have started coming together and culminating into a full identity and belief system that had a lot of speed and momentum behind it. I'm listening to it. Go ahead.
I remember at one point, we might have been during this zone, but as Robin and I were meeting, first we were meeting one-on-one, and he would talk to his mom because we're different. I'm very different with David than Robin is with him, and sometimes we did it together. But what was happening is the only resource I could reach for was the Word of God, right? How many of you know what I'm talking about? And as I began to say it, David would say, Dad, I know everything you're going to say. Because he knew the Word of God. And when I started saying it, he would pause me and say, I know where you're going with this. And he did. He knew where I was going. He knew what I was trying to do, is I was trying to shake him into, like, listen to this. And he's like, no, I know that verse. What? That's wild. So that's what was going on. It's like, yeah, and he did.
Yeah. And it's not that you just start to, everything is, the enemy doesn't want you to only focus on the Bible, and it's ordained and written by God. It's God's living word for a reason. And it tells Jesus' story in that specific way for a reason. But the Bible is de-elevated also, and everything else is like, feels more truthful, because it's in some way, it's giving you power. It's making you, I didn't even realize it at this time. I didn't say it like this, but you are becoming your own God. And so if you know better, and I'm telling my dad this, I know, that reminds me of this other thing who I think is teaching that in a better way or a different way or whatever, and I'm taking that as my truth. And you start to build.
Yeah, you were pulling from a lot of resources.
Oh, yeah. Again,
except
the Bible.
Except one of them, yeah.
Yeah. Which is part of the deception, part of the plan, part of the other forces working against what God's trying to do. Okay, so we're in 2025. Along the way, I think Jesus has been de-escalated, been made to be a normal guru and teacher. And again, I might say this a few times. When you're in this world, I would never call it New Age. You just don't. I think a lot of that is because there's not one way to be New Age. And I think New Age is a really old lie. It's the original lie, and so it's not really new at all. But there's so many paths in that you just think New Age means you're, crazy aunt that likes crystals, that is a hippie in some way and connects to God and the way that she does. And you picture New Age as that. Or you picture New Age as, Buddhist Zen practices from Eastern philosophy, and you're meditating with your hands, or certain forms of yoga or whatever. I think that all can be considered other religions or other traditions or part of the New Age, but it also includes, or I guess how I would summarize stuff would be like, a lot of it could be, and the part that I kind of was in the most, can be very much just feel scientific, feel logical, feel about how your body works, feel about frequency and vibration and consciousness, and it could feel like very coded in light and love. And this is crazy, but there's nothing, how do I say this? Like, it's not against the rules or it's not against the law for the enemy and his minions to use the word and concept of love. That's still fair game. But that doesn't mean it's the same love that we are offered through Jesus. And the idea of light, like it says, I think it's in Peter, that Satan presents himself as an angel of light. Not only did he look good in the beginning when he was created as a being, I think he was beautiful, but imagine, and I didn't see him myself directly, but imagine experiencing this being that feels like pure love and light and is muscular and built out, and you're just feeling this entity of the presence. You could be very easily deceived that is Jesus or God in some form. And so, all that to say, 2025, I'm full steam ahead into the new age, even though I wouldn't call it that. I'm in online communities and masterminds. I'm reading, listening to audio all the time. I'll just hit some names so you could, if any of this makes you feel something, or any of your kids or people that you know are into any of this stuff, it might, be a sign for you. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's all about being present. It's kind of taking some philosophies and teachings of Jesus, but really just watering it down and making it about you being God, present in the moment, very zen as well. Joe Dispenza talks about and teaches about, very scientific. He's like a brain neurosurgeon, I think. His whole thing is if you achieve heart-brain coherence, then you can heal your own self. I don't think we could heal ourselves in that capacity that Jesus can offer. But if you open your brain and heart to these other powers and sources of power, they do offer short-term healing or even real healing. That is possible, and I didn't know that. That's a whole world, is Joe Dispenza. Ram Dass, he's a author, teacher. He's essentially this American psychologist and professor that went to India, had a bunch of drug trips, then realized he missed it. And his form of finding God was this guru that kind of trained him in Eastern philosophy. But it's this whole other thing where, yeah, Jesus was one signpost along the way, essentially pointing that we're all our own gods, and that's how you connect to God. And also that world is very much coded in and believe in reincarnation, which I did at that time. So your life is less meaningful and important if you have multiple times and multiple chances, and I don't believe that's true anymore. It's funny to even have Jesus redeem the idea of YOLO. I did not think that was possible, but he did.
What was YOLO?
You only live once.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, I heard some people needed that. Yeah, you only live once. You only have this life, so make it count. Okay, sounds crazy.
That's good.
Yeah, it sounds crazy to say, but I'm just going to hit a few more names in case, again, it might mean something to you or someone else. Man, there are people that channel. Have any of you heard of channeling and mediums? Man, there's a whole world on YouTube of that, and TikTok and Instagram. And the zone of that and the area of that I found is so much coded in love and light, and also real information about. It's crazy that, and we could just in this context call them demons if you want to, but they also know the history of our world even better than we do. They were there before man was created, so of course they have a lot of answers and information to give about how the pyramids were made and why certain geological points on the earth have energy, and a lot of science and a lot of math. And I think outside of the coverage of Christ, I do think that's where a lot of people get real inspiration and ideas for inventions, for starting companies, for they connect with powers and entities outside of the kingdom of God, because there's real information coming through. There's real downloads happening. There's real ideas coming across that frequency and that antenna that you're tuning into those stations. And so Bashar is this guy, Daryl Inca, that channels an ET. And so I would listen to a lot of this guy Bashar because he could offer information about why certain things in our world make sense, and real information about stuff which I was craving. Abraham Hicks is another one. She's this lady that channels, I don't even know what she calls. I think she channels this entity named Abraham. But she is all about the law of abundance and the law of attraction and living your best life and manifesting what you want. And in that language, when you don't know what's happening, you just think, yeah, I'm getting these codes and this information to like programmatically follow these steps to get whatever I want. Like, it sounds like something else, like something in the garden, that's offered in those moments. One more. No, that's it. Okay. So, to make it personal to me, right in October, before my dad sends me this text, I was probably at my boldest level of talking to friends and family about what was happening in my life, which I think.
Yeah, you weren't just a participant at this point.
No.
You'd gone into being a promoter. Mm-hmm. You worked for the company.
I did.
You no
Yeah.
longer just like, oh, I believe this stuff, but I keep it to myself.
Yeah.
You are now putting it out there,
Yeah.
leading.
I was.
Yeah.
I'd be in online communities, and I would, hear things for other people because I'm still prophetic and sensitive in that way. But I would have words of knowledge for people, but they weren't from God. So crazy to think who that was from. But yeah, my gifts were fully co-opted at that point. I was boldly proclaiming for the other team. But the big examples I would use from my own life was I would speak to how this stuff works because it worked for me. And my examples were two big things that I manifested for myself. One I would talk about was my dream exit from my job. I knew I wanted to leave this company. I'd worked there for 7 years. It's the longest I worked anywhere. The company had gone through multiple CEOs, a bunch of change. It's still so crazy to picture my story and all this happening where I'm just working full time in the background and I have a daughter growing up. It's wild. But that was still happening. I still enjoy working and having a career, but I was ready to move on from my job. And I literally wrote down how I wanted to get laid off. I wanted to happen in this way. I wanted this timing. I wanted this much severance. I had one designer on my team that I managed, down from managing 6 people at one point. And I wanted her and I to get laid off at the same time, so there was no awkward one designer left at this company anymore and barely having the company hang on, whatever. I just got all that to say, I got really specific about how I wanted it to go down. And then within 3 weeks that happened. My boss calls me 4 days early before the layoff happens. It was a 3rd round of layoffs. He was very sad to tell me that I was included in the layoff. He felt bad that he let me down. And I got to tell him, oh, this is fuel for my next thing. This is exactly what I wanted. This is something I knew was coming. And then I got laid off and had 6 weeks of severance, or however long it was. I had severance. Took our family to Japan. I didn't have to do that on paid time off. I got to do that on severance, which is way cooler. So that was one big example that I would use as kind of like this moment. Another one was my dream car. It's sitting out in the parking lot. A Rivian, which is a very expensive, very nice car. I would just say this now, not the best decision. Business-wise, personal-wise, it wasn't. I'm still working through that with God, and that's okay. But it's just a huge example of man, when you were in this deep, when I was in this deep, you don't realize that you're making decisions that feel good for you and are your desires and are coming true. That doesn't mean it's the best for you. That doesn't mean it's backed by genuine power that cuts through all debts. Those two examples, and there was more along the way, but I literally would journal. I would talk about how my life, multiple days in a row or weeks, would feel magical, would feel full of synchronicities, if you know what those are. If you're looking for them, not only can coincidences not just be coincidences, they could be synchronicities. The enemy and other forces working against Jesus and God's plan for your life can show up in lights turning green on the street and angel numbers on clocks and letters being sent to you out of nowhere and people calling you on the phone when you're thinking about them. All of that is fair game because I believe the spiritual realm and this second layer of heaven is not this layer like a cake. It's a layer that it exists at the same time on top of our reality. And
so there's constantly good things happening.
There's constantly good things happening. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the car was my big example. Again, not the best decision, but I was very stoked at the time where I remember getting over the fear of being scared to write the detail of the color and the interior and the rims that I wanted in my journal. And then when I got over that fear and I wrote it down, I had the car in the driveway within 2 weeks. The process was very smooth, very easy. Made a down payment on it that I had set aside, and it felt like magic to have the car, we picked up the car, we drove it. It's an amazing car, but could I afford that? Really? No. Should I have bought that? No. But when you're manifesting your dream life and you're envisioning and feeling a future wealthy version of yourself so that you can embody the confidence of that person now, you're just taking a shortcut. You're signing up for a loan that you don't know is a loan that can get called back at some point. So, okay, back to the podcast. My dad sends me the podcast. We're in October. We're on Sunday now, October 12th. Me and my wife switch off who's doing bedtime with our daughter, Millie. It was my wife's turn for bedtime. I cracked open my laptop. Sometimes, I don't always do this, but just one small detail. Sometimes I'm doing design work on my laptop that I really have to focus, or if I'm writing or doing emails or strategy, I have to think. But sometimes I'm just doing some production design that I can work in the background and listen to a podcast and still have it work. It's kind of akin to doodling, I still think doodling and listening is a really good way to learn if that fits your personality and your style. So I was essentially designing and doodling, doing some work on my laptop, but in my headphones, just with me listening to this podcast from this lady named Krista on Blurry Creatures. And you guys can look up this episode. It might not be for everyone, I'll just say that now, but it was tailored specifically for me. And we found this out even more so after the fact. It was sent to you by your friend Nate.
Yeah, Nate Doran just happened to mention it to me at a lunch and said, you should listen to this. You're into weird stuff.
It is weird stuff.
I had never heard of it.
It was
weird, and then I listened to it and I had that question. It's like, wow, I really wonder if this is what my son's into.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was challenged to send you that text. I was scared. I sent it to David and Allie separately.
Yeah.
There was purpose behind that. I don't know if that was good or bad. And then I didn't know what happened. And so this whole thing of him beginning to crack it open and listen to it, I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, it wasn't like I was live texting him as it happened or whatever. It was still 4 or 5 days before we talked again. But so, yeah, this specific episode might not be for everybody. I do encourage you guys to check out this YouTube channel and these guys named Blurry Creatures.
Episode 352.
Episode 352.
Never forget it.
Yeah, they started in 2020 around the concept of Bigfoot. I know, sounds crazy. They're exploring Sasquatch and Bigfoot as they
that is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They started a podcast about that, but they call Bigfoot the gateway drug into I see you over there. Into learning about all things blurry. And what they mean by blurry and what the joke is in the name of the podcast is the first, really groundbreaking pictures of Sasquatch or Bigfoot were blurry. And why is all the video blurry? That's one of the main, counter arguments to if Bigfoot is real. But that includes other creatures too. And they took that concept and ran with it. It's 80s themed because they grew up in the 80s like I did, 80s and 90s. They're 80s kids. And so they're awesome. But I remember seeing the YouTube version of the thumbnail, seeing these two guys, seeing Krista. I was like, this is not for me. I'm not looking forward to this. But let me lock in, let me put my headphones in, and let's hit this head on. So, and here we go. So if you do listen to this podcast, certain things might stand out to you. You might actually find a different episode that will be, jumping off the YouTube page or the Apple podcast feed or whatever to you. But again, this one was specifically crafted and timed for me. So the order of how it happened for me was within 15 minutes of this 90-minute podcast, there was no denying, everything I kept hearing inside of me was just, and this is a funny phrase, but game recognizes game. Yeah. The respect level was there, and I could not deny it. And
people are laughing because that's literally gamer language. So if you're not a gamer, which
it comes from sports.
Is it a sports thing?
It comes from sports.
Is it really? I didn't even know.
That's how nerdy he is. Yeah.
Is it a sports thing? Well, they already know I'm not into sports, so I thought it was a gamer thing.
No.
Most of our family's
Yeah.
gamers. Okay, I didn't even know that.
No, but I had to respect this lady, Krista Black. She's amazing, but I'm 15 minutes in. She's even on the fly in this podcast, forcing herself, letting herself use the language that she would when she was still within the New Age, which I respected, I actually needed. Because if there's too much church language in the beginning of this podcast and her story and her sharing her beliefs and her journey back to Jesus, one too few many church words or words from the Bible, and I might have been, shut that thing off. And so about 15 minutes in, she's not only naming every author that I had explored, every path that I went down, the source behind them, where the original ideas come from. She was just hitting boom, 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 boom. 15 minutes in, I'm like, whoa, I have to listen. And I have to respect her journey, what she's been through, and that something's happening here. Yeah. Okay, so she even says this little moment, she's like, I'm not going to use the word Lord, even though I do now. But it took her, after she got back with Jesus, it took her a while to get comfortable calling Jesus Lord. But she didn't in her story. And I needed that at the time. Because when you're not with him, it's hard to call him Lord. And that's part of the plan from the enemy. So I'm rolling through this podcast. I'll just hit my points that kind of broke me open. I will cry at all these parts probably. It's okay. Praise Jesus. So her big moment, her life, she got way deep into, which I did not, but she got way deep into plant medicine with her and her husband. And she has kids, and I believe 2 or 3 kids. And she was exploring plant medicine and many different types that have a real history and real information that they offer and real entities that these plant medicines connect to. And I don't believe that these plant medicines in any form were some random mix of chemicals that we discovered. I think they were given knowledge. And that's part of the deception and part of the scheme. But I don't think you accidentally stumble upon these brews by yourself. No matter how long you're working on it in the jungle of Amazon or Colombia or whatever, or here in the U.S. with Native Americans. I don't think you just stumble upon these things. I think that's given knowledge outside of the coverage of Jesus. So her life is essentially a wreck at this point. She's been deep into this in her journey. She's on a beach in Costa Rica. Her husband is wanting to become a shaman and administer plant medicine in Costa Rica. She also had heard from a shaman in a medicine ceremony herself that she was supposed to take everything to 0 in her life. And when you're that far gone or that deep, when you hear something like that, it doesn't set off alarms. You just say, okay, that's part of the plan. That's part of what's going to happen. It's the dark before the dawn. It's the moonshot that's going to happen where stuff's got to get really bad before my next level of growth.
Literally go broke on purpose.
Go broke. Well, don't be surprised if
Sure.
and when everything goes broke. It's not like her selling stuff and being frivolous or whatever. It was like, oh, when bad stuff happened, it's part of the plan kind of thing. Yeah. So she was told that her life will go to 0. And that is meaning she's on track in her way. Which is so scary to think about now, but that was part of her journey. So she's on a beach. Her life is a wreck. And she opened up to Jesus on this beach. She's looking out the ocean. And she said, Jesus, I know you're real. If you would speak to me again, I only want to hear just from you. And she says, he told her 2 words, Anunnaki and Nephilim. Yeah, yeah. And she actually did not know what those words mean. So she was like, one more time? One more time on that? And Jesus again said the same 2 words, Anunnaki and Nephilim. And it's okay if you don't know what those words mean. And Krista didn't at this time. And she's like, okay, anything else? Nothing else, just those 2 words. So it really caused her to wonder, well, okay, what does that mean? The crazy part is I knew what those two words meant. The Nephilim is another word for the fallen angels in Genesis and before. And the Anunnaki essentially is the secular New Age version, or rooted in the tradition and stories of Babylon, version of beings that came to Earth and seeded humanity, or involved with essentially being gods or demigods or sons of God in some way. And the Anunnaki is an alternate history version of that story, and the Nephilim is the biblical version of these same beings that were cast out of heaven that rebelled. So Krista calls her mom.
And you could say the phrase, Genesis says it, they were called the sons of God.
Yeah. Genesis 6.
That's in Genesis.
Yeah.
Genesis 6 is a really big chapter.
In the blurry world,
Right.
in this world, in my coming back to Jesus story, it's a big thing. But what I felt and heard in that moment was, if Jesus was saying that to her and she didn't know what that meant, it kind of gave her something to research and go ask about. I knew what those words meant, but literally what I was feeling is like I could consider coming back to Jesus and not leave questions aside, or not leave certain things unanswered, or not. He had answers for me in the realm of those two words too, and that was important for me. Why is that important for me? Because I care about where we came from and why. And it's okay if other people, other generations don't, or have their version of why they're locked in with God through Jesus, and that's their relationship, and that's great. I'm, again, curious. Again, very blessed. I don't know if I said this to you. I think maybe some version, but I also had an amazing upbringing, and I have an amazing dad and an amazing mom. And so I don't have that same father wound that a lot of people have, which is very valid and okay. But when you find God the Father in that way, from that wound, you just lock in with having a new father.
That's what I told David.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Yeah.
I locked in with Jesus because of that proposition.
That's great. Again, I have an amazing dad, so it's like, I know that when I was a believer and a Christian, that I did have God the Father, but that didn't hit the same for me, because there's not that emotional hole to fill. I had a knowledge hole. I had a curiosity hole. And so God was speaking to me through those two words, that you can still have those curiosities. I have answers for you. Again, I don't believe that God has answers for everything. That is one thing that I've learned, is that a lot is still supposed to be left up to the mystery and wonder of God. But that doesn't mean that we can't figure out and talk about what Genesis 6 was talking about, and what are the sons of God, and what does it mean to have fallen angels turning into, having relations with human women and having children, and what is a demon? What's the unclean spirit of a giant mean for our faith and for our belief system, and for what our story of humanity and existence is built on? So those words were very meaningful for me. Again, she went kind of thing by thing, topic by topic, manifestation. She's like, it's witchcraft. You're pre-signing up for a loan that you don't know that you're agreeing to. She started talking about the layers of heaven. First layer or plane that we exist on and live on. Second layer is where angels and all these other entities, the rebellious angels, the sons of God, other entities, demons, they all live and exist in this second layer of heaven. And the third layer of heaven is where just God the Father lives. And she started breaking this down. She said in the New Age, you call the second layer of heaven the astral plane. If you try hard enough, or if you do it the right way, you could sometimes meditate and feel that or see in that realm. I was never able to, and I think that was God protecting me in that way, and I thank God for that. But people do. It's a real thing to see and feel in that astral plane, and it's a whole other side of things. But she starts breaking down this, building a case essentially where everything in the second layer of heaven and entities, even if you don't know you're making agreements, they are still under the law. Jesus has freed us from the law, but these entities still live under it. And they use that to their advantage. And so if you're being offered things or offered information or offered manifestations or things that you want in your life, if you're under the guise of thinking that you're making it happen yourself because in some way we're all one love, we're all one consciousness, and I'm this little pinpoint of the universe showing up as God himself, living out life to have the experience of that. I don't believe that anymore, but when you're under that mindset, it kind of shuts out the possibility of like, not only is that not true, but you're not only receiving information from your higher self. You're not only talking to or making prayers to or affirming things from your higher self. You are speaking to, interacting with, receiving power, and making deals with other entities, demons, fallen angels, other powers.
You're saying they're under the law because they've got boundaries and restrictions, but you're saying these are our legal transactions.
Yes.
And they know it. We don't.
Yes.
We don't even think of these things. Like when someone receives Jesus and says, "Hey, I'm going to yield my control. I'm going to give you my life," it is a legal transaction.
Yeah.
Because that's the way it works. We say, I know who I am. I'm a sinner saved by grace, and I understand and I repent. But it's a legal transaction that takes place. So, that whole idea of names written in the book and all these are legal transactions. We don't really operate in our world where we understand these are legal transactions. And in this kind of stuff going on, there's legal transactions and people don't even know they're selling or giving rights to the enemy to come in and just start doing whatever he wants to do.
And everything in that layer, that realm works with your permission only. They don't have permission to do anything to you, give you anything, talk to you even, unless the door is open, the opportunity is there, but then until you give agreement or give permission to. But that permission doesn't have to look like signing a dotted line. It could look like praying or speaking to your higher self or asking for information from entities that go by other names or love and light versions of anything. That's you giving permission and openings to that to happen. So when Krista is breaking this down, she literally says this little line of like, now she pictures these entities as lawyers walking around with clipboards, offering you a loan. I just pictured car salesman, but also,
sorry if you're a car salesman.
Yeah, no offense. But also, it's already hitting me. The company I worked for as a designer, I was in personal loans. I was in personal lending. I was in debt consolidation. I was in debt alleviation. We helped people with personal loans that were in credit card debt. Talk about a parallel. I'm fully out of a job. I'm working for myself at this point, but that was definitely a part of my history. And I know the language of debt really well. I also know from even before that, with Jesus' time in my life, which was a majority of my life up until that point, I know what sin is. I know what having my debts paid for is. But when you forget, when you lose your way, when you wander, explore other things, the idea of debt feels different when it's not just about you doing things wrong or making mistakes. When you are literally creating things in your life via receiving power from other things and signing agreements spiritually to make that happen. And Krista's going through, she's like, not only are they walking around with, clipboards, and I'm literally picturing manifesting my job, layoff and the car. And in that moment, I felt the debt. And I didn't feel it as sin that I needed to get clean of, which there was that in my life, and I dealt with that, which I will talk about. But it's different that yes, the transaction with Jesus is a legal transaction, but it's the last legal transaction that you ever need to worry about.
That's it. Amen.
Hallelujah.
Because as Krista says at this part of the podcast, and I'm starting to fully break down at this moment, as you can see, she says the blood of Jesus and the bank of Jesus never runs dry. Yeah. You'll have to hear that part from Krista. I got to keep going. But, man, when she said that, something broke in me. I realized that I had been deceived, that I signed loans, and that those loans in that moment, or I guess in the month of October leading up to that moment, were getting called. And I realized that I was having my version of a go to zero moment and rock bottom. Mine was different than Krista because I'm a different person. So yes, there was financial stuff there. There was things that I couldn't pay for there. There was a dry season of clients and working for myself there. That was all true. But I think I felt my giftedness, my spiritual version of being broken in that moment where I realized through those agreements that I had given away my power. And at the same time, I felt the extreme contrast and difference of what the power of Jesus felt like. And it was so crazy in my body to feel that at the same time. Of the weight of decisions that I made, the weight of agreements I had made, the weight of living my life that I did up until that point, I felt the weight and repercussions of all of that. And at the same time, and even in more intensity, I felt the love of Jesus right there. And Krista said, there's also, she went on to describe, and this is so crazy to even think about, and this might blow some of your minds, but not only are there other powers and entities and things that you could receive power from and hear from and all of that in this spiritual realm which is directly on top of and overlapping with our world, but there's a false Jesus. Satan can present himself as a false Jesus. So even people in the New Age or in other religions or other traditions or opening themselves up in a certain way, you could feel and see a false Jesus that can fully trick you, that is going around to people. And Krista saw this in her version, which you can hear, but she said at certain plant ceremonies or medicine ceremonies or whatever, she could see a being of light touching people on the shoulder spiritually and them getting healed and going around and touching people. And so I was like, whoa, wait a second. Like, am I even hearing from the real Jesus in this moment? And then Krista said, but the way that you can know the difference is the power feels, and she stops herself and she's like, I don't want to use the word holy, though he is. She says he feels clean. And not that I felt dirty. I felt my own version of guilt, and I worked through that. But the power felt clean. I had so much visualization of fiber optic cables are just made of glass tubes, and I imagined all these little glass tubes hooking up to myself and the power sources that I hooked myself up to. And they're not clean because they don't have the power to be clean in that way, and they all have ulterior motives. And they all have other plans for you that you don't have to know about when you're feeling this stuff and you're feeling this power and you're experiencing what it feels like to create things and have things happen in your life. So when she said the power feels clean, and I was feeling that coming back into my life in that moment, I knew Oh, that's the real Jesus. So I finished the podcast. I mean, the other big pillars really quickly was like the power being clean, the bank of Jesus never run dry. That whole him paying for my debts in that moment felt completely different than it ever had before. Not only was he paying for my debts, but I was freed from the whole legal system. But I had been playing the whole game for 5-6 years at that point in the legal system. And I don't want to be in that system. I don't want to operate in a way that I, in some way, shape, or form, think I'm my own God, and therefore I'm under the law of the entities that are actually giving me these powers and things and words and all of that. And they're stuck under that system. And Jesus freed us from that system because he paid the ultimate sacrifice. And I knew all of that. And so it just made it so much more personal to me. I had this quick moment where I had to consider, and I don't think she even said this in the podcast, but I think Jesus was already speaking to me again in this moment. And the whole idea of social justice. And I had this flash of memory over the past 5 years, and I was like, social justice issues, like helping people, helping the least of these, helping people in need. I literally remember asking myself on the couch, do I believe that our world is getting worse or better? And I was like, worse. But everything in the New Age world would have you be convinced or teaches that it's all love and light and it's just getting more positive. And we're almost there. We're almost bringing in this new earth paradigm. We're almost achieving one love and flipping the universe and our earth from bad to good. But what I realized in that moment is not only is the bad not talked about or is evil not talked about, it's all contextualized in a completely different way. And on top of that, you do not see and experience what you don't focus on. And I just think that's part of how we're built as humans. So if you're not focusing on the brokenness and the evil that is still present and growing in our world, you never see homeless people anymore. It breaks my heart to say. Like, I was going through this checklist in my head. Wow, do I really think that sex trafficking is not a thing anymore? That humans aren't being trafficked? No, I think that is. But how come I haven't heard about that for 5 years? Do I still think that there are people that are starving or in poverty, living in extreme poverty? Yeah, I think so. Where's all the nonprofits that aren't, Christian-based or with Jesus, like helping those people? Where are the New Age organizations or companies that are helping widows and orphans? And that's a big part of my history and connection with Jesus and to the church and to service. And so that was another big nail in the coffin for my previous set of beliefs, is like, not only did I believe our world was still getting worse, but that Jesus and him working through his church and through people is his main plan to save the world and to help the least of these. And it was just another big pillar that completely crumbled in my belief system at that time. I finished the podcast, sat down. I was already in my head and heart making the decision to focus on the person of Jesus. He was already speaking to me at this moment. I was already feeling him. Thank God that I had been saved, and that not only was I protected from a lot of things, but I just kept hearing and feeling so intensely, David, I can come back to you and into your life as intensely and as fast as you're able to handle. And I was like, okay, that's hard. It's this crazy mix of excitement, guilt, intense love from Jesus. The contrast was wild to feel. Belief systems and things already falling away very quickly. Repentance in terms of changing my mind, changing my direction on the fly, like thing after thing after thing. And then I remember this last final moment that kind of confirmed everything. I do this with myself, how I work on myself, how I try new things. I treat things as experiments. So already in my head and heart, I'm like talking to Jesus. I'm not opening and closing doors to other things, realizing what had been happening. And then I'm making this kind of plan in my head. Okay, I'm going to give Jesus all out, 3 days, nothing but him, full only talking to, communicating, channeling with Jesus. And I'm like getting excited. That 3 days never stopped, which is great. But that's how I was setting up in my head. And so I was like, okay, 3 days, all out, let's do this. And I had to consider one more time, like, man, I really need to make sure that I'm talking to the real Jesus and not a fake, false Jesus. And I don't even like, I'm be extremely vulnerable, and I don't mind talking about this. It's just like, it's hard to not feel guilty and shameful about, but which Jesus healed all that already, so thank you, Jesus. But I did have a spirit guide family, and that's hard for me to say, but it's a real thing, and people have this, especially in the New Age world or in other belief systems. It feels and hits very different if your group of spirit guides, mine was a crazy mixture, which I'll talk to you about if you want. If you're curious, I'll tell you who they were. They disappeared very quickly and crumbled. But man, that feels very different when you're like, wait, are all of those just demons? Or demonic spirits, or unclean spirits, or entities, whatever you want to call it. If they don't have your best interest at heart and they're not covered by the blood of Jesus, or if it's not Jesus himself, then it's something else. So whatever you want to call it, whatever range on the spectrum that you want to put these other entities on, I had a group that I would hear from or speak to that I needed to clean house in that moment. And so not only was I questioning, well, the whole time that I would, gather these spirit guides or whatever in my spiritual headspace, I would tell other people this too, and tell myself this, that Jesus was still one of my spirit guides, because I knew him, and he's still a teacher and a guru in this space and world. And so I remember I'm fully open to Jesus at this point, kind of doing inventory spiritually in my head and heart, going around this literal circle of beings in my mind, and like, they all fell away and melted very quickly as soon as I decided to close all of those doors. And Jesus was still sitting there, cross-legged on this, fully black void space where I was picturing everything. But it was a circle of multiple beings. Then it was just Jesus, like he was in that circle. And he was still sitting cross-legged. And I was like, already asking him, Jesus, is this really you? He's like, yeah. It's really me. I didn't go anywhere. I've been here the whole time. But ask yourself, when's the last time you heard directly from me? And would you say that you had heard from those other beings in your spirit guides? I was like, well, I know I did. And also, now that I think about it, I haven't heard directly from Jesus in a really long time. Why is that? I had to really fully question that. I mean, I was in that moment, but in terms of the symbolism to me and the importance of the spirit guides, like as him as one of my guides, I was like, no, he doesn't speak to me or give me information or tell me things or converse with me like these other ones did. And he says, because I was waiting for you to only choose me. And it was hard to go to bed that night, but I did eventually. But I knew I was fully committed to only connecting to and being with Jesus at that point. I was so thankful for that he didn't leave. He literally in that moment, he said, but you need to only choose me. I'm in my mind's eye, changing my perspective. I'm facing him from the front. I'm tangibly choosing him in my head and heart. And I don't even see him get up. We're just hugging. He's standing. And he's just holding me and hugging me. And then I knew I was back. And even that first night, man, guilt and shame is the first thing that creeps in. And he is so kind. That night, he was so kind. He kind of clipped that off immediately. He's like, no. You only need to feel the guilt and shame as long as you need to know that you were wrong. But once you realize that, you don't have to feel it anymore. It wasn't the space that you have to keep sitting in. It wasn't this thing that you had to dig up and live over and rethink your decisions and go through over and over again. Like, no. Like, not only did he cover that, pay for that with his life and resurrection, but that's not the life that he has for you. He wants you to move on and live for him. He doesn't want you to get stuck in guilt and shame, because I was feeling this in that moment, and I know this to be true now. When God the Father looks at you, he doesn't see any of your guilt or things that you did wrong or shame. He sees Jesus.